To all those above me that watch over me, to all of you, my fave parapeeps on this side of the veil, welcome. This is the Paranormal Ministry. I'm your host, Shawn Whittington. I am a seminarian in the United States Old Catholic Church, and I'm coming to you live from my haunted house, my very haunted house, where I live. Got a great show today, and that's why you all tuned in. Nobody tunes in for me, they always tune in for my guest. She's in the green room, and I will bring her out shortly. But two things, keep your fingers crossed. They had bad weather back in her neck of the woods, and we're talking elementals and fairies and the little folk here today. So they might mess with whatever they can mess with. So let's keep our fingers crossed. On that note, happy St. Patrick's Day 2023. I hope everybody's having a wonderful St. Patrick's Day, and it's funny. Friends of mine that I've known forever have reached out to me today, like sending condolences. We know you don't drink anymore. We know you've been on Nutrisystem for over a year, and it's Lent, and you can't eat meat on Friday. So, how's your day going? How's your St. Patty's Day going? My St. Patty's Day, it doesn't matter what's going on. It's always a great day for me. Like most people know that I was baptized under St. Patrick as my guardian saint, and many years later, during my confirmation, I was again confirmed under him in the Catholic Church as being my guardian saint. So it's always been a big day. Um, St. Patrick's brings a lot of controversy, as much as it is what it is. I dealt with a lot of controversy being so into St. Patrick all my life. Too with that, and that's cool too. I don't judge. Everybody's got an opinion, but today for me, it's all about love and light, and just trying to be the very best version of myself I can be, the very best Catholic I can be, which means love, 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 love. So that's what today is for me. But having said that, I do happen to know a little birdie told me that the wife is going to swing by one of our favorite Irish pubs on the way home, and she's going to get me some authentic fish and chips. I know you're saying to yourself, that's not Irish. That's okay. I'll take it. Um, Probably be in the quick care later because I can't remember the last time I had those fish and chips, but I'm looking forward to it. So that'll be waiting for me in the kitchen when the show's over with. But we do have a great show today. Um, I'm not going to check the prayer urn because I'm going to offer up a prayer for all of us. And I peeked inside the mailbag today before the show started, and the mailbag's empty. How often does that happen? So let me offer up a nice little prayer for all of us today, my paranormal ministry family, in honor of St. Patrick's Day, because I love you all. You know that, right? In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Dear St. Patrick, in your humility, you called yourself a sinner, but you became a most successful missionary and prompted countless pagans to follow the Savior. Many of their descendants, in turn, spread the good news in numerous foreign lands. Through your powerful intercession with God, obtain for us the missionaries we need to continue the work you began. Amen. If there's anything you want to know about my wife and I and our ministry work, go to our website, www.ghost-b-gone.biz. And if you go there, remember, my wife and I don't charge for our ministry work, helping people with their paranormal issues. So, brothers and sisters, I know times are tough, but if you notice the donate button and you're able to do so, click on it and send my ministry in a small donation. I promise you, it'll be appreciated from the bottom of our hearts. And trust me, we'll put it to good use. In addition to being an ordained exorcist, I'm also a certified spiritual advisor. So if you're having issues of a spiritual nature, not necessarily attached to the paranormal, and you'd like to make an appointment to speak with me about those issues, there's a place on the website where you can do that. But don't leave the website without navigating over to the page called the WSE course/book. On that page, you'll find the ghost store. Lots of cool things to buy in the ghost store if you go for that sort of stuff. And everything you buy, the pros part of the proceeds go to many things that I donate to and support. But scroll past the ghost store and you'll run into my new haunted autobiography, God, Ghosts, and the Paranormal Ministry. And I quote, scariest book I ever published. That was Annette Munich, owner of Stellium Books, my publisher. But don't let that scare you off of purchasing a copy. If you haven't done your good deed for the day yet, part of the proceeds of every sale of every copy of my book goes to support stjude.org, St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital, Nevada, and the ASPCA. How cool is that? It's a no brainer. You get to help some of the neediest children on the planet, along with the animals, too. That's very cool. You can get the book a little less expensive at Amazon, but if you order it off of the website, I autograph it for you, and it arrives in a house blessing kit. So that's very cool. And it's a great time to pick up the first book because God, Ghosts, and the Paranormal Ministry 2, Chronicles of an American Exorcist, comes out in October. So it's a great time to get all caught up before you rush right out and get the second one. Scroll a little bit further past the book, and at the bottom of that page, you'll see the Worldwide Society of Exorcists, which I'm a founding member. I offer a 12-week online college level course, Introduction to Spiritual Warfare, through the WSE. And that is a course for all you true warriors for Christ out there that feel a calling and a longing to want to have more knowledge when it comes to drawing your line in the sand, making a good stand, circling the wagons, and putting up a good fight against, God forbid, true evil if it ever comes calling. This is the course for you. No, it's not going to teach you how to be an exorcist. That's a completely different calling. It is exactly what it is, Introduction to Spiritual Warfare through my eyes, through what I've experienced over the years in the deliverance ministry biz. And I want to pass that knowledge on to those that feel a calling and want to have it. So you can enroll there in the course on the website. If you want more information about the course before making that type of commitment, there's a Worldwide Society of Exorcists Facebook page. Go there, read about the course, or reach out to me. I can talk to you about it, see if the course is right for you. Most importantly, please keep all of my former, current, and future students in your prayers. And all my students that graduate get a stunning diploma, certificate of completion, suited for framing, along with some other very special blessed gifts that you can only get from yours truly. Okay, the moment of truth, the reason why you all tuned in, and I'll tell you what, meant to happen, meant to be. Every St. Patty's Day, I always pull out my little The Luck of the Irish book and do a little light reading out of it. And the first page I just open up to is this beautiful, cute little prayer. And it is so fitting for my guest that I'm going to start with this little poem as her introduction. Because she really doesn't need an introduction because you guys all know her and love her and know who she is. Up in the airy mountain, down the rushy glen, we daren't go a huntin' for fear of little men. We folk, good folk, troopin' all together, green jacket, red cap, and white owl's feather. The Fairies by William Allingham. Without further ado, please give a warm St. Patrick's Day and Paranormal Ministry family welcome to the one and only Morgan Daimler.
Hello, everyone.
Morgan, you look very pretty today.
Thank
Uh,
you. Happy to be here.
I don't know what your background is. Is it my camera or do you have the most beautiful red hair I've ever seen?
I mean, I don't know that it's the most beautiful you've ever seen, but yeah, I have red hair.
Well, you know what? I don't know if you've worn it down in your past times you've appeared here or if you've had it tied back. I don't remember you having such long, pretty red hair.
Thank you.
I mean,
I,
you are
I,
like, I don't know what your background is, but you could be on a poster for what the Irish look like. I don't know if you've been told that before.
I'm Irish American as part
Well,
of
there
the
you go.
Irish American diaspora, so Maybe that's where it comes from. I usually have my headset on and I'm on a different computer, but we're having tech issues,
Oh
so
yeah, yeah. I already warned everybody in my brief opening. You had some bad weather in your neck of the woods, and you know what? I know everybody's out there, you know, thinking, Shawn's crazy anyway, and I could be. But every time I have somebody on that talks about the conversation is heavy on the elementals, and I do believe I have some here on my property. Um, Weird things happen.
mhm.
So knock on wood, and whatever else we can do to throw the mojo off. Um, I'm confident we're going to get through this unscathed. And let me throw something else out at you. You know me. You know that I'm not one of those hosts where it's all about me. I know nobody tunes in for me. They tune in for my guests. I have, for 2 weeks now, I've tested myself twice for COVID. I don't got it. And on that note, everyone keep praying for Zach and Adrian. They're fighting off the effects of a bad case of COVID.
That's
But
rough.
I've tested negative, but I've had this reoccurring cough for like 2 weeks now. So if I get to talking too much, I could go into a coughing fit. So if you talk the whole show, I'm cool with that. But I do have some questions for you that some of your fans
I might be
have.
coughing a bit too because I'm allergic to everything that pollinates where I live, and we're just getting into that season, so we'll be a good pair.
Oh, look at us. Look at us today. Okay, so these are all questions pretty much from your fans and followers. One question I asked you earlier this week, and it was I don't know if I heard back from you and didn't notice the message, but somebody wrote in and said they heard you were also a poet. And if so, did you have a poem that you might want to share with us today?
I certainly can. It would just take me a second to pull it up. I am a poet. It's not sort of my main thing that I do, but I dabble. Um, and I do write poetry about the fairies and the good folk. My poetry around them tends to be a little more on the intense side, which probably doesn't surprise anybody. Um,
And after and take your time, and after you uh, talk to us or recite your a little bit of your poetry for us, I'll make sure everybody knows your website um, and all the books you've written. You can recommend for the first time reader of Morgan Daimler what you would recommend, and I think you might even have something new coming out just around the corner. And I know I just think also saw I might have made a note about it. I think you have. Yep, I did. You've got an event coming up that you're going to attend. We'll talk about all that stuff. But yeah, I do believe, and I've told you this before, that I have elementals. And I'll tell you what, I am going to ask you a question.
sure.
And I didn't plan to ask you this, but you live where you live. I live where I live. There's people that live in Canada, people live in Russia, people live in China, people live in
All
South
over.
America. But we're all human beings. Could What do you think about some people believe that an elemental is an elemental is an elemental. They just happen to be in different parts of the world. It's like I do believe my wife brought home this the most unusual looking. I don't know if it's from the sea or from a volcano or what. I know it's from the island of Hawaii. And we were having some really weird supernatural activity here, but weirder than usual out in the property, especially. And I noticed this rock. I never noticed it before, but I noticed this weird rock in our flower garden. And I asked her about that. She said, "Oh, that's the rock I brought back from Hawaii when I lived there." And I went, "Oh, even I know that you're not supposed to do that." And she didn't know that. But I didn't want to rock the boat. So what I did was I moved the rock to the most beautiful area. And there's not many on my land because I have probably 10 feral cats living on my land. So they've destroyed everything. And my mastiffs have too. But the nicest part of the garden, I put the rock there. I prayed over it. I blessed it. I gave it gifts. That's the little bit of the Native American blood in me. I gave it some gifts to appease it. Um, and things got better.
Mhm.
But I thought I saw a mini Hoonie peek
Goodbye.
through my doggy door one night when I'm sitting there. It's 1, 2 in the morning. I'm watching TV, but my lounger faces the doggy door, and I thought I saw a mini Hoonie peek through my doggy door, and then close the flap and walk past the window, and I could see it. And I tried to talk myself into that it was one of the cats, but it didn't look like a cat. And usually, a cat, once its head is through a little doggy door, will jump in,
Yeah.
and they've done that too. Um, so Mini Hoonies is supposed to be from Hawaii. We've got the legends. I've talked personally to many people of the Cherokee indigenous bloodline
Mhm.
who have talked about the legends of the little people that they've encountered throughout their history here in America. Then you've got the leprechauns and the fairy folk and you know, what do you think they're all in the same family? They just are in different parts of the world, or there's distinct differences?
I mean, I think family is a good way to put it. I do think a lot of times we'll see distinct differences depending on where we're looking, but I think they're all sort of loosely related. So, like, we have the specific types you can find around here. It's the Makiawisa would be the indigenous beings, and they are similar in certain ways to what we might call fairies or find in Europe as fairies, but they also have their differences. But I think they're enough that we could say they're like the same family of sorts of spirits. Um, and of course, you have elementals and you have nature spirits everywhere. Those are kind of a universal concept. They're all over the place. I hesitate to call something a fairy that's not from sort of Western Europe or isn't from a place where the people there use the English word fairy, um, just because people have so many assumptions with that word. When you hear fairy, then you're picturing a very particular kind of thing. And a lot of times when we're talking about, like you mentioned, the Cherokee, the Yunwitsundi or the Nunahe, they're we might use the word fairy in English, but it's not a great word to go with because you have all these assumptions with it, and they would be different in certain ways. Although it does mean little people, as you mentioned, Yunwitsundi. Um, so I think that if we think of them as like cousins or second cousins in some cases, like that might be a better way to understand it. Uh, same wider family, but some variations. Does that make sense?
Absolutely does. And here's another question I wasn't planning to ask you. And this is the way our conversations always go. They take on a life of their own. But my next question for you would have to be, do you think it's possible for them to interbreed among the different uh, species, if you will, of little people? And are these people, they're so physical, especially if you encounter one, very temperamental, very physical. You got to be very careful around them. But are they actually inhabiting our world, or are they in visitation from another realm?
Sure. I think that when we're talking about nature spirits, we would be talking about something that's more anchored or rooted in the human world. When we're talking about what we would call fairies, the other crowd, the good folk, or these other like various spirits like the Mkiawisug and such, um, those I think they're visiting more than that they live here. They have another world that they're from or another dimension, however we want to understand it, and they can kind of come and go between them, which is something we see a lot with the Irish folklore, the belief in the Aishi, the people of the fairy hills, that they're in our world, they come into our world, and they get up to assorted things, but they live someplace that's different. And this is something from a more Christian perspective that in the old material, in the old writings, it used to get compared a lot to purgatory. It's sort of this middle area It's not the human world, but it's not heaven and it's not hell. It's sort of a third option, if you will. So I think we see a little bit of both, but more of the kind that are just visiting.
In your travels and in your studies, I don't think I know anybody who is as versed on the topic or has studied the topic more than you. Is there any of these factions that are warring? Like, you know, I have this beautiful. I wanted to bring it in today. I wonder why I didn't. I have this beautiful etching of a famous portrait that hangs in a museum in somewhere in Ireland, and it's of a leprechaun, and it's riding a dog, and it's like somebody like the artist, the painter, drew a painting of something like that he may have seen that was real. It's not cartoony. It's
Yeah,
not like the leprechaun in the movie Leprechaun, but it's like, and I don't know if you know that painting. It's famous, but when you look at that, it's creepy.
yeah.
As beautiful as the portrait is, the painting is. It's also creepy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you wonder if, like, is there any factions that are warring? And if you could have, they say in Ireland, they never build near the fairy mound or disturb them, but leprechauns could be anywhere. Like, do you ever hear of them warring factions like the leprechauns versus, that would make a great movie, the leprechauns versus the fairies or the fae or the little other little people?
Sure. We in Ireland, there's certainly a lot of folklore about this. There's an idea that the good folk are very territorial, and that they have certain places that they would consider, belonging to them, and that they're not just territorial with like humans. When humans show up and get into their stuff, they're also territorial with like other groups of the good folk. So like there's folklore about the fairies in Galway who are fighting with the fairies in Connaught because over the harvest, or just over the fact that they're from different counties, and that they'll have these wars. And I mean war, not in the sense that we would really understand it, but like battles. And in some cases there were stories. I'm trying to think, this was in McNeil's Festival of Lunasa book, where she talks about some people, when there were thunderstorms, would say that was the good folk fighting, and the sound of the thunder was them battling. But we also do see the idea of some of them fighting who aren't of the same culture exactly. So like there's an account, this was in a folklore journal in, I believe, 1894, here in the US, his US folklore journal, talking about Marblehead in Massachusetts, and how the people there believed there was this group of pixies and there was this group of fairies, and they did not get along and they would fight. So we definitely have that concept that the two groups, or I should say any two groups of the good folk, might not necessarily be on good terms, or might. Sometimes when I say they fight, I mean like they'll play games like hurling, which is a sport. I guess in the US it would be football or baseball. But they'll play these like competitive games with each other, and whoever wins is like the winner of that fight. And other times it's more, classic fighting with like fists and stuff. But very competitive at the least between different groups, for sure.
That wouldn't be good if you were living in an area where two factions were warring or battling. That wouldn't be good.
Particularly not for the humans around, because there's an old belief, again, this is in Ireland, that a lot of times when the good folk want to do this, they have to have a human. And the human sometimes is like the referee, like the neutral third party, that, like, especially when they're playing the games, sometimes they each have to have a human fighting on their side in order to be able to have this happen. So yeah, if you're a local human when this is going on, you want to like stay indoors, not get involved, because a lot of times it doesn't end well for the human. They're kind of literally stuck in the middle.
Zach would like to know how many books have you written?
I believe the last time I counted, I was at 45. I have 11 that are nonfiction. I have 6, I believe, that are, I translate Old and Middle Irish. So I have 6 that are related to that. And then the rest of them are nonfiction.
Well, I'll pop on to ask this question because I don't like to type words that fast. So, I'm not going to be writing any books anytime soon. But a lot of your books I noticed were about gods. How close are gods from Ireland and Norse gods? Are they very similar? Do they mention each other in the stories? Do they cross paths? Because I saw Freya, you have Thor, right?
Yep.
In there. So, I know those are 2 Norse gods.
Yep. I've written let me think, 4 books now on Norse mythology. One is just Norse pantheon in general, and then I have Odin, Thor, and Freya, particular books. Most of the other deities that I write about are Irish. There is a surprising amount of crossover in certain ways because Ireland was settled at one point, not recently, obviously, but hundreds and hundreds of years ago, by people from the Norse countries. And actually, the Dublin, which is the capital of the Republic, the name for it is derived from Norse. It was originally a Norse settlement. And we see that in a few other places as well. So right outside Dublin, there was historically a sacred grove dedicated to Thor. So just to kind of show like how the influence spread. We don't, as far as I know, have any mythology that directly links the two, like talks about the Norse gods and the Irish gods together. But we do have things like that sacred grove of Thor in Ireland. There's been a lot of work done in academia discussing the Irish influence in Iceland, because what would happen is the Norse, the Vikings, the Norse settlers will just nicely say stop over in Ireland, and
That's beautiful. Nicely stop over.
Stop over.
Yeah.
And Irish women would end up going with them, not voluntarily, to Iceland. So a lot of people in Iceland actually, through like the maternal side of things, have Irish ancestry. And a lot of Icelandic beliefs relating to things like the Huldufolk, the hidden folk, what we would call elves or fairies in English, is very similar to what we find in Ireland. And it seems to be because of this sort of cultural blending and syncretism that happened because of that, because you have all these Irish women kind of brought over, but then you have the Norse culture, which obviously is the dominant culture in Iceland. So you get this interesting mix of beliefs happening.
In your humble opinion, do you believe uh, everybody, so many of these old ancient cultures were all about stories?
Mm-hmm.
But in my humble opinion, I believe there's a lot of truth behind these legends and folklores and stories because that's all they had,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't really. I don't really believe it was in their DNA to just outright lie and not, these stories usually meant something and they were like warnings and things to carry traditions on and so forth. I believe, wasn't it an old, you bring up Norse, wasn't it early Norse settlers up in the great northwest of our country that wrote about encountering Bigfoot? Am I on the right story or am I thinking of something else?
I'm honestly not sure because it's a little out of my
I'll
main.
look into that after the show today, and
Yeah,
I'll
now
I'll
I'm
throw you a
curious.
message. I think I read somewhere where some of the early Norse guys that have originally arrived here on their boats wrote about encountering these giant, hairy men that were naked running around the forest warring with them, and Norsemen don't scare. They not I don't even wouldn't even say they don't scare easy. They don't
Yeah.
scare. Um, but they were truly in their writings. They were truly frightened of these beasts that they encountered. Um,
There's definitely a lot of folklore that gets preserved in older material like that. And there's a lot of things that, scholars today look at and suggest anyway alternate explanations. So like Selkie folklore. Selkies are people, they look human on land, they're seals in the water. And it said that when they come out of the water, they take off the seal coat, and then they can dance as humans on the beach and what have you. And then they put the seal coat back on and go back into the water. And
wow.
there's all these stories about, fishermen who would steal the seal coat, and then the Selkie can't go back in the water, so she marries the fisherman. And there's a lot of folklore about this. But modern academics, several at least, have now suggested that this might actually have originated with encounters between people. And we find these stories in Scotland, the Orkney Isles, Ireland, Iceland, that this might have originally started with people, fishermen in those places, encountering Inuit people, because there are documented cases where that happened. The cultures interacted, and that might have sort of led to this idea of these mythic or folkloric seal people. Obviously, you can also choose to believe that there's actual Selkies and seal people out there, but it's sort of one explanation for the story that folklorists will offer, that it was encounters with the indigenous people, effectively, of sort of the Arctic area, and that those stories, when they got passed on and repeated, became these stories of these mythic seals, often seal wives. There were male Selkies too, though, so equal opportunity.
That would make a great movie.
Yeah, so Shawn, that short. The story I just shared was about Leif Erikson. Um, he in 986, he encountered large men, large
Mm.
hairy men. That he used the words Skellring, and Skellring is also barbarian. So, but those were discovered in the New World, not anywhere else. So, but yeah, I looked that up, and yeah, it was Leif Erikson who said that he
Is there a difference
discovered.
between the Norse and the Vikings?
No, that's they're generally the same people, but their Viking is actually a career.
Yeah.
It's not a person, it's a career. So people would go Viking, right? But they were Norse. Norse people would go Viking. You'd have your farmers and your Vikings. So
They were the ones who went out raiding and
yeah,
settling
Very
Dublin and
interesting.
getting
Very,
up to all
very
sorts of trouble.
and bringing home new friends.
Yes. Bringing home new friends, bringing home gold that they liberated from monasteries,
They were the inventors of the original dating service.
Yeah, they
Um,
definitely got around. They
what
have a
did I
lot of
want to
really
say
cool
to you?
technology too, though. They
Just
were
this
good at what they
week,
did.
leading into you coming on this week, I can't sleep. I'm up late. I'm channel surfing, and the credits are coming up, the opening credits. So I'm at the beginning of the book or the show, and once I get into it, I have to watch it again, even though I've already seen it. Was that movie? And thinking about movies now, um, was that one that I told you about, The Hole in the Ground, and
Oh,
then it dawned on me. She recommended another movie to you, and I came back and I looked through my old notes, messages we had sent back and forth, and I couldn't find that movie, the other movie like The Hole in the Ground that you recommended to me. Do you remember what that was?
probably The Hollow.
The Hollow.
Hallow, Hallow. Um, I'm a writer as a career, and I can't pronounce words in English. It's very sad. Probably The Hallow. There's another good one that came out recently. A horror, of course. It's called, I believe it's, now I'm going to forget the name. I Am Not Your Mother.
I just saw that too. That was good.
Yeah, that is such a good movie.
That is
That's
really a good movie.
That's probably the best modern take on changeling folklore I think I've ever seen. Because it's creepy and you're kind of not sure what's going on, and there's all that folklore that gets worked in. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, it's a good movie.
I'm glad you've seen it.
We're about to get into I can feel it coming. We're about to get into the changeling thing. And I promise I'm going to have a. Don't let me let this show end. Well, it's 2:35. Don't let me let this show end without you sharing a poem with us. But before we do that, I know we're going to get into the changeling thing. I'm really, for some reason, find myself fascinated about this changeling. For some reason, recently here, this whole thing about the changeling. Now, I had a guy on the show these 3 Fridays in a row were all about uh, Irish folklore and legends and stuff. And the guy I had on last Friday, was born and raised in Ireland, still lives there. He's a professional storyteller. He's known as the Story Man. And he told, when we started talking about changelings, some things I didn't know. He told me about, if you ever look at some old Irish photographs of families, you'll notice the young boys are dressed as girls.
Girls, yep.
I did not know that, and I did not know why until he explained why, where he was going with that story. He says, not so much anymore, but I find that fascinating. I mean, come on, that's a true belief in something,
Yeah.
so much so to go to that extreme. But I had a woman who reached out to me from Ireland, and she says I knew the thing about the iron crosses and them not liking iron. So I guess I don't know if they used to put their kids in iron shoes, but they would put iron crosses under the pillow.
Mm-hmm.
She said something keeps, her child's too young to do it. Something keeps taking the iron cross out from under her child's pillow, and then it's gone and she has to get another one. And she wanted to know how versed I was on the legend, and I told her not very much, but I'll tell you what you're experiencing isn't good. Here's my best advice for you. And I have yet to hear back if my advice is helping her. But talk to us a little bit about anything you'd like to share with us about the changeling legend, and because for some reason, I'm really fascinated about that.
Yeah. Oh, and there's so much to it. I mean, really. And I love that you have the changeling poster on your wall behind you as we're talking about this.
One of my favorite movies. A lot of people don't know that was based on a true story. Mm-hmm. And I loved the movie. The book is even better. It was a book first. A lot of people don't know it was a book first, but loved, one of my favorite all-time movies in that genre.
I'll have to check out the book. Yeah. But yeah, so changelings. I mean, one of the big things that I make a point to tell people when the subject comes up, because modern pop culture people tend to assume changelings were always infants or like toddlers. But we have a lot of changeling folklore that was older children or even adults. And I can't remember if we talked about this before on the show, but one of the most famous changeling stories, if not the most famous changeling story in Ireland, was Bridget Cleary. And she was 26, and she lived near a ferry hill and had gone out. She sold eggs, had gone out to sell some eggs walking past the ferry hill. And when she came home, she wasn't feeling well and ended up coming down with what the doctor would say was bronchitis. But it seems like, looking at the material, that she probably ended up with pneumonia. So she got quite ill, and her husband became convinced that she was a changeling, that his real wife had been stolen when she was out walking by that ferry hill, and that the sick woman that he had in the house was actually this fairy changeling. And it's actually a very sad story, so I don't know if we want to get into all of that, but it kind of demonstrates sort of the wider idea with changelings is this, the healthy, happy human disappears or is taken away and is replaced by something that people decide is not actually the human. And there's usually a change in personality that's noted. The health goes down. There's certain signs and symptoms people would look for with changelings. And then there's certain ways to try to get the changeling to leave. A lot of them are very cruel. Bridget Cleary did not survive. I'll just say the treatment that was attempted with her. The idea that changelings are a much wider range than just, infants and little children. And boys were a popular target as children. So like you were mentioning with the dressing them as girls, that is something that people talk about in folklore, particularly in like the Aran Islands and Galway. That was still done, I think, into the 40s or 50s. But I'm not 100% sure on the date when it finally stopped. Changelings in folklore, the explanation is it's either not a human at all. It's like a stick that magic makes it look like a human.
Really?
Yeah. Or it's sort of the fairy retirement plan. It's a very old fairy that just wants to lay in a cradle and be catered to. So interesting retirement plan on their part, but something we see.
Have you heard when these changelings? Let's go back to the story that didn't end well with the death.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you answered the question about intermating between the little people, the elemental species. Mm-hmm. Are they always, for lack of a better term, do they always seem to be pissed off when the changeling comes in, or do they try to act somewhat, go along with the program and try to fit in? And if that's the case, could it be possible? Could the husband have made love, for instance, to this changeling woman and then not know, or something even worse happen? His soul get taken, or his life force get taken, or that illness get passed on.
Yeah. I mean, all of that is certainly possible. What we tend to see is that the person who is the changeling, there's a pretty sharp change. No pun intended. So like there's a story, this is an anecdotal account from Ireland, of a boy who was 9 years old, had gone out with his friends to, I think it was gather nuts. And the friends all came back. The boy didn't. So everyone was out looking for him. A couple hours later, they find him. But when they found him, he wouldn't speak. He wouldn't really react. So they brought him back to the house and were, trying to take care of him. And for like a week, this was the case. He was in this almost like catatonic state. And then it was suggested that he might be a changeling. And they went to someone who sort of specializes in that sort of thing, who told them how to get their real child back. And they did the thing they were supposed to do. And the catatonic boy kind of disappeared, or they went to check on him. He wasn't there. And then they see their son, walking down the road towards the house. And he has no memory of that whole week, anything that had happened. The last thing he remembers is going out to gather the nuts. And after that, according to the story, returned to his family and lived a normal life. Didn't have any other experiences like that or moments like that. So that's a lot of times what we see with changeling stories, is this idea of the person kind of radically altering in some way. With infants, it's like the baby gets accidentally left alone for a short amount of time, and when the mother or the caretaker comes back, the infant in the cradle all of a sudden looks completely different, and won't stop crying and is constantly hungry, things like that. So usually from the stories it's fairly obvious, but there is an interesting theory that I've seen, not all changelings, but that some changelings, it might actually have been a case more like possession, which would be much more your ballywick than mine, but the idea that the physical human was still there, but that their spirit was being overshadowed by something other, something fairy, and that they had to kind of have that forced out or taken out in order to return to the way that they were before. So in that sort of a case, I think there'd be more of a chance of it being more subtle, maybe, and the person not immediately realizing, because there wouldn't be those health effects that we see with some of the other stories. It was more of a subtle change in personality. So in those cases, it's hard to say how long that might have gone on before people really started to get suspicious.
Very interesting. Very interesting. You know what? I'm going before we run out of time. I'm going. If you have one, I know what the next question I want to ask you, but I don't want to run out of time. If you have one of your beautiful poems you would like to share with us,
I have a poem. I don't know how beautiful it is. You'll have to judge that for yourself.
I know it's going to be good. But if
And
you
I
want
don't.
to share that with us, that way I don't have to worry about the show ending and I didn't get a chance to have you do that because
Sure.
I know the person that requested that and they'll be mad at me.
And I don't usually read my poetry out loud, so this will be an experience for everyone, myself included. This one, it's called Wishes. It's from the perspective of one of the good folk, kind of talking about the way humans today are so prone to being very loose with their words in wishing for things. So I'll just read it. I'm probably going to blush while I'm reading it, so it's fine. So wishes. People talk about wishes now as if they were cheap things, spending their desire on casual words and wants that are lost between one thought and the next, forgetting that words are things with weight and power, not to be wasted. People talk about wishing they could see fairies, as if fairies were beings that exist to serve people, forgetting 100 lifetimes worth of wisdom, warning them not to play lightly with their own destruction. I would warn them as well if I could. Or perhaps not. For what fun is there in a game with no one to play with? Eternity is a long time to be bored when your playthings stop playing. And it's hard enough when they break so easily. Then again, what fun is there without the chase and seduction? When they trip over themselves in eagerness to fall into my hands, thinking all their wishing has finally paid off, and I need no more effort than showing up with a smile. Not much of a game, that, when once they've promised, once they've misspoken and given themselves up to me, the only fun left is the same struggle and slow breaking that's been played out so many times before without change. Perhaps I would warn them after all, if they'd listen. Perhaps I'd remind them of all the old fear and caution, of babies and brides stolen, of a hint of music that haunts, of their place feeding a variety of appetites, some quite bloody. Perhaps I'd tell them of how there is no winning for them, once entangled, whether it's by the dark or the light, because it's a choice of suffering to amuse those who can't be pleased, or endless, nameless, dull service to the same. If I did, they'd be wary and watch their words and hide. They would think, being wise to the truth, they had a chance. It's a grand game, then, when the mouse gives the cat a good run, and I much prefer having to be a clever cat. I don't suppose it matters much in the end, though, either way. One way or another, the great game will keep playing out. As always, they will keep their wishing. I messed it up right at the end. As always, they will keep wishing for things dire and foolish. And if luck is against them, their wish will be answered.
It was beautiful. And you did a great job.
You're right up till the
Now,
end.
now I know what to ask you to do every time I have you on the show. That was great.
Thank you.
Um, And two things I thought of when you mentioned the word cat, I was already thinking about. I don't know if you ever saw that old. I forget the name of the movie, but there was like several stories in the one movie, and they were all Stephen King stories. And one of them, I
Cat's paw.
believe, boom. What was that little thing? Was that like a troll?
I think so. Yeah, we've just
Got on her
revealed my
chest, and it would
secret, like
actually
Stephen
suck her
King addiction.
life out of her mouth.
Yep.
And the cat saved her. I thought that was very cool.
Yeah.
Um, and I think of some of the ones that I just find it fascinating how some of these legends start, and I wonder what really caused it to start. But you have to be careful. Like I mentioned it in that little poem out of my book. They mentioned red cap, and I know the red cap is supposed to be a very violent elemental that most times lingers around old abandoned ruins in Scotland. And if you encounter the red cap, it will attack you. And they say that iron doesn't push it away. It's not fearful of iron, but here's the religious thing comes into play. Prayer. For some reason it'll prayer chases it off.
Yep, that's the
So
only thing that works on the red cap.
isn't that crazy? And I would love to know how the red cap legend started, because that's supposed to be very very violent, and I don't know if they were trying to scare people off of uh, of going into these ruins. Who knows? Um, I find the origin behind a lot of these to be really really interesting, but
Yeah.
um,
On a quick side note, there's a movie that just came out called Unwelcome, which it's set in Ireland, and Ireland doesn't have red caps in the same way, but the monsters in that movie are red caps. So
unwelcome.
looking for a good red cap horror movie.
There we go. I got two now. I got the Hollow and Unwelcome.
Yep. Unwelcome just came out, hot off the press. Yeah, red caps. It's hard to say. They do haunt ruins, which are places you would want to warn people away from because they could be dangerous. The idea with them, of course, is the cap is red because they dye it in human blood.
That's right. I forgot.
So,
yeah,
definitely not your friendly. You want to run into them at night kind of spirits. And they sort of fall into this interesting zone of like they're dangerous, but in some stories they would like only attack people who are like murderers or oath breakers, or they sort of target bad guys in some of the folklore. In other stories it's like anyone who could be dangerous. And to your original question about like how could some of this have gotten started, if you were trying to like keep highwaymen or whatever from holing up, hiding in ruins, a good way to do that might be to have a story about this particularly bloodthirsty kind of being that likes those particular type of people the most as victims and lives in ruins. I would certainly be hesitant in 1780s Scotland to go hang out in one of those places if I was making a living by robbing rich people on the roads. So maybe.
Well, what do I want to say to you before the show ends, other than I love you and respect you? I think you're cool, and it's always great to have you here. And I'm going to have you
always
back
great to be here.
Is there anything I want to make sure everybody knows the website www.patreon.com, one word, / Morgan Daimler, all one word.
And I do have a lot of free content up on my Patreon. It's not all, you don't have to pay for all of it. Just so
in the couple of minutes we do have left, though, I have two notes here to ask you about. I must have read somewhere that you do have a new book coming out, and I must have read somewhere you have, and I wrote it down here, the Gala 10th Annual Worldwide Metaphysical Tribe.
That's in
you have an event coming up and a new book.
August? Yes. I'm always up to something. I like to keep busy. I have a book, 21st Century Fairy, that just came out at the end of January. That's looking at fairy beliefs in the 21st century, sort of modern fairies, because a lot of people don't see them that way, but there's actually a good amount of that material out there. I have a novel coming out the end of May. It's called Into Shadow. It's high fantasy, if you like that sort of thing, elves, dragons, all of that. And then I have that book on Freya that we were talking about a little bit earlier. That actually comes out in July. So it's a busy
Wow.
summer for me.
Wow, it really is. Holy cow. How do you do all that? It's like I'm embarrassed now. I even held up my one book.
Oh, you know,
Talked
one
about
book
my
is
second book,
amazing,
but
though.
I don't know
One
how
book
you
is
do
more
it.
than most people have.
I don't know how you do it.
I don't know how I do it either.
Zach typed in another question. Hey, Morgan, I would love to have you on my show. Yes, that you would be great on Zach's show. It is all about small business, artists, and nonprofits. Yeah, you two should get together and talk
Yeah, message
about
me.
coming on his show.
I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm sadly on all social media pretty much at this point.
Let me make sure I didn't forget anybody's question that they sent in to me for you. I don't think I did. I think I memorized them all. Oh, here's a good one. Somebody wanted to know, and I also know the person who sent this one in. People in our field tend to bring a lot of stuff home that we don't want to follow us home, like gum on the bottom of your shoe, like from demonic drive-bys
mhm.
or to ghosts that tag along and follow you home. Being so into what you're into, do you get do you draw the attention of this sort of stuff, and do you get especially where you live? Do you get a fair amount of that activity around you or your home or your land?
I definitely have a lot of activity around me. Because I've been doing this for quite a while, and I know a lot of the ways to sort of ward off and defend against things. Like I try to be very clear in like what is and what is not allowed, within the premises, so to speak. But yeah, I think it's inevitable. And, a lot of spirits, whether we're talking about ghosts or fairies or what have you, if they realize that you're aware of them and if they realize that you can see them or communicate with them or what have you, I think that gets their interest. It piques their curiosity, which I think is also why paranormal investigators end up with things attaching to them and following them home, because they like having someone who acknowledges them and is aware that they're there. So yeah, that's definitely something that I've experienced. And you just have to, and I'm sure this is true as well for you, you just have to keep up on that cleansing, and spiritual hygiene is one thing we could call it, and prayer and warding and whatever
I love
else you
that
need to do.
spiritual hygiene. I love that.
I think that's the best concise way to explain it,
I love
that
that.
term.
Well, Morgan Daimler, I thank you so much for spending an hour out of your busy Friday, St. Patrick's Day, to hang out with us here. Um, I know everybody loves it when you're on the show. So
Thank you for having me on.
I'm not done with you. You'll be hearing from me a couple more times this year, especially when right around the time you have a book coming out or you got something going on. You know I'm going to reach out to you. So please give your whole family a big hug for me. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have a great remainder to your St. Patrick's Day evening. And I will talk to you very soon.
You as fun. You know where to find me.
Morgan, I'll see you later. Talk to you.
Have a nice night.
Bye bye. She'll be back, I promise. Okay. Zach and Adrian Clayton. Don't know what I would do without them. I wouldn't have a show. Or I would try to do the show myself and it would really suck. Um, Thank you to both of them, and I hope they're feeling better and getting over their funk. CommunityPayItForward.us. Go there. Shop. Every time you shop, you help somebody out there. USOCC.org, the church I belong to. If you're interested in night prayer, which is every weeknight, Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Pacific, or Bible study, which is every Wednesday afternoon and Sunday afternoon at 5 p.m. Pacific, go to bishopjameslong.com, scroll to the bottom of the homepage. The links to those two things are there. And who couldn't use a little more God in their life? Thank you to Things Network. Thank you to Temple of Phoenix Rising Entertainment. Thank you to Skeleton Key Network. Thank you to Pact, little p, capital ACT, Podcasting for All Coming Together channel for all of the networks simulcasting my show. And don't forget, BeInspiredRadio.net. BeInspiredRadio.net. Chicky Hot, the rock psychic, that's her radio network. She simulcasts my show, re-airs episodes of my show all day long on Saturdays. And she's got a lot of other cool shows there, including a lot of replays of old Art Bell shows. Very, very cool. So check that out. I hope everybody has a wonderful, safe, blessed remainder to St. Patrick's Day 2023 for you. And it is bad joke time. I'm going to pull a bad joke that one of you all sent in out of this haunted carnival barker hat. And it's my poor attempt to put a smile on everybody's face before I say good night. What do lawyers wear to court? Lawsuits. Good night, Danny. Good night, Jack. Good night, Dog. Good night, Harold. Rest in peace. Good night, Ernie. Good night, Bill. Good night, Dan. I love you all. God bless you all. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Peace.